It happens quietly at first, not in childhood because childhood is too busy being enormous. It happens later when you notice that a whole year has vanished with the suspicious speed of a weekend. January arrives. You blink once or twice in a tax-related direction. And suddenly someone is putting up holiday lights again and asking what your plans are for next year, as if this year was ever given a fair chance to exist in the first place. And the unsettling part is not just that time feels faster. It is that it feels faster in a very specific way. You can remember being young and waiting for things, waiting for summer, waiting for birthdays. Waiting for a TV show to come on, waiting for someone to text you back on a phone that at the time was still attached to a wall. Back then, time had weight. It had texture. A school year felt like an era. A summer afternoon felt big enough to contain an entire civilization. Now whole months disappear into a blur of tasks, screens, routines, and calendar notifications that seem to reproduce while you are asleep. So what changed? Not the clock, not physics, and at least not entirely your imagination. What changed is the way your brain is building the experience of duration, because the brain does not measure life the way a calendar does. It does not look at a year and say, yes, 365 days all present and accounted for. It looks backward and asks a different question entirely. How much was actually there? Now, the most famous explanation for this is the ratio theory, and to be fair, it is not a stupid theory. It says that a year feels longer when you are young because it is a larger percentage of your entire life. At 5, 1 year is 20% of everything you have ever experienced. At 50, it is 2%. That is elegant, it is intuitive, and it probably captures something real. But it is also not enough, because if that were the full story, time would speed up in a perfectly smooth mathematical way, and real life does not behave that neatly. Some years at 30 feel enormous. Some years at 20 disappear. The ratio helps, but it does not explain the actual texture of the experience. To understand what is really happening, you have to separate two things people usually confuse. There is prospective time, which is how long something feels while you are living through it. And there is retrospective time, which is how long a period seems when you look back on it later. These are not the same process. In fact, they often produce the opposite result. The classic example is boredom. A boring afternoon feels endless while it is happening because your attention is stuck to the slow machinery of passing minutes. But later, when you look back on it, the afternoon seems to have barely existed at all, because almost nothing in it was distinctive enough to leave a proper memory trace. And the reverse is also true. A rich, novel, absorbing experience often feels short in the moment. A trip, a long conversation, a day spent learning something difficult, a night you actually enjoyed enough to stop checking the time every 7 seconds. Those experiences seem to fly while you are in them, but later they feel substantial. They have edges. They contain scenes. They leave behind enough distinct memories that your brain concludes a lot must have happened there. Which by its own accounting system means a lot of time must have been lived. This is why childhood feels so strangely vast in retrospect. Childhood is full of first times, the first day at school, the first time getting lost, the first humiliating social disaster. The first time realizing adults do not actually know what they are doing and are mostly improvising with better posture. A child is encountering a world that is still wildly underexplained. The brain cannot compress those experiences efficiently because it has never seen them before. They have to be encoded in detail. The light looked different. The room smelled different. The fear was real. The joy was real. The memory stayed. Adult life is different, not empty necessarily, but familiar, and familiarity is efficient. The adult brain gets very good at prediction. That is one of its great triumphs. It stops spending full attention on what it has already learned to classify. The commute becomes background, the office becomes background, the grocery store becomes background. Even entire weeks can become a kind of lightly supervised repetition in which the brain says, yes, yes, I know this part, and records only the minimum necessary to keep operations running. When that happens, life is not being fully lost, but it is being compressed. And this is where people often imagine there must be some single internal clock in the brain that has started malfunctioning, slowing down, speeding up, doing something dramatic in a control room somewhere. But neuroscience is much ruder than that. There is no neat little time organ sitting behind your forehead with a pocket watch and a sense of moral responsibility. Time perception appears to be distributed across multiple systems shaped by attention, emotion, memory, and context. Which is why time can stretch under fear, drag under boredom, vanish during immersion, and collapse in hindsight if nothing memorable happened inside it. That last part matters more than most people realize, because when people say time is speeding up, they often mean something very specific. They do not mean that the last hour felt shorter. The research suggests that short spans often do not change much across age. What changes more clearly is the feeling of larger stretches, especially years and decades. In one influential study, older adults did not differ dramatically from younger people in judging how quickly the last hour, week, or month had passed. The stronger age effect appeared when they were asked about the last 10 years. In other words, the real acceleration shows up when the brain tries to summarize life at scale. And when the brain summarizes life at scale, it does not count days, it counts distinctions. That is the mechanism underneath almost everything. Distinctions, event boundaries, changes in context, new skills, new streets, new people, new emotional states, new stakes. The more separable a period of life is into distinct chunks, the longer and fuller it tends to feel in retrospect. The more it smooths into one uninterrupted stretch of competent repetition, the shorter it seems after the fact. This is why a chaotic, difficult, transitional year can feel like several years packed together, while a perfectly efficient year of routine can disappear with the suspicious elegance of a magician's coin trick. Now here is the particularly annoying part. Many of the things people optimize for in adulthood are exactly the things that make life feel shorter in retrospect. Efficiency, friction reduction, predictability, same route, same tasks. Same restaurant order, same entertainment. Same conversations about whether we are all very busy, which we are, and whether we should catch up soon, which we will not. All of this can make day-to-day life feel manageable. But from the standpoint of autobiographical time, it is a compression machine. That does not mean routine is bad, it means routine is invisible. And there is another layer on top of this, which is attention. Experience only becomes memory properly if enough attention lands on it. The unattended life is hard to remember not because it did not happen but because it was thinly encoded. If you eat while scrolling, walk while worrying, listen while preparing your reply, and move through entire days in partial attention, your brain receives less usable material from which to build the sense that a meaningful stretch of time has passed. You were alive for it, but you were only intermittently present for it. This is one reason mindfulness research, cautious as we should be about overclaiming it, is so interesting here. Experienced meditators do not seem to become supernatural clock wizards who can outfight physics. But they do report less time pressure and a slower subjective passage of time. Which makes sense if what they are changing is not time itself, but the quality of attention being brought to experience. More attended experience means richer encoding. Richer encoding means a thicker sense of lived duration. Emotion matters too. A highly emotional period, grief, love, fear, upheaval, relief, humiliation, triumph, tends to burn itself into memory much more effectively than neutral routine. That is not because emotion is poetic, though it is. It is because emotional arousal changes memory formation. Which is why a week containing one devastating phone call can feel larger in memory than 3 calm weeks of normal life. The brain is not impartial about what it preserves, it is trying with mixed success to remember what mattered. So if you put all of this together, the answer becomes much clearer. Time seems to speed up as you age, partly because each year becomes a smaller fraction of your life, yes. But more importantly, it speeds up because life often becomes more predictable, more compressed by habit, and less densely marked by first times. The brain, looking backward, finds fewer distinct memory anchors and concludes that less time must have been there. Not because you were doing nothing, because too much of what you were doing had become cognitively smooth enough to blur. And that gives us the practical answer, which is much better than nostalgia and considerably more useful than despair. If the brain judges duration partly by memory density, then one of the only real ways to slow the feeling of time is to create more distinction. More first times, more novelty, more challenge, more variation, more attended experience, not necessarily more dramatic experience. This is important. You do not need to become a mountain climber or move to a monastery in northern Japan or start every morning by plunging into an ice bath while reciting Seneca. You just need more of your life to stop being perfectly predictable. Learn something you are bad at, go somewhere unfamiliar, change the route, rearrange the day, read outside your intellectual species, say yes to the social thing you usually avoid, cook food you cannot yet make properly. Visit the town 2 hours away that you always dismiss because it is too close to count as travel and too far to count as convenient. The brain does not care whether novelty is glamorous, it cares whether novelty is new. That is the real secret. Childhood felt enormous not because time loved you more than but because the world had not yet become compressible. Everything was still arriving for the first time. You cannot go back to being 8 mercifully. But you can give your brain more firsts, and that is probably the closest thing we currently have to making a life feel longer from the inside. Because in the end, your brain does not ask how much calendar time passed, it asks how much life showed up inside it. And if you want time to feel less like it is vanishing, the answer is not to grip the clock harder, it is to give the brain more to keep. If you've noticed your years disappearing faster and want to change how you experience them, tell us your thoughts in the comments below. What's one new thing you're going to try this week to break your routine? Let's talk about it. And if you want to uncover more deep psychological truths about the way we live, hit subscribe and join us next time on Pencil Stick.